From the perspective of Captain David Carmichael, USSS Prospector 7. Red emergency lights washed over the bridge, turning the familiar consoles into bleeding wounds of metal. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the stylus above the log panel. Record. I have to leave a record, even if it's the last thing I ever do. Outside the viewport, instead of the usual stars, an impenetrable, viscous, oily darkness swirled, from which icy fingers seemed about to reach out. Ship Slug, Captain David Carmichael, USSS Prospector 7. Date. The date doesn't matter. Communications lost. The reactor is unstable, but that's not the main problem. I swallowed, my mouth dry as the Gobi Desert. Sounds drifted from the corridor. Not the screams of people, not anymore. Now it was something else. Scraping, wet, slurping, and that low, vibrating hum that penetrated the bulkheads, through the bones, straight into the brain. They are all dead, or worse. My gaze darted to the life support sensors. Empty. All indicators were off, except mine. I was alone. Or so I thought. The artifact. We shouldn't have touched it. My fingers cramped. I remember how the geologist, Vale, shining with excitement, showed us the thing. A black, shimmering stone found in the heart of the asteroid. He called it a marvel, a key to understanding the universe. Now I know it was the key to madness. It sings. The stone sings songs that drive you insane, songs from the very void. A ringing filled my ears, mixed with ragged breathing. I saw them. Not always clearly, but they were everywhere. Eyes in the walls, Captain. They watch from the darkness, gasped Jones, the comms officer, before he was dragged away by something that looked like a living shadow with a dozen writhing appendages. I saw it with my own eyes, but my brain refused to accept it. It changes shape. It takes the form of your fears. It feeds on them. I forced myself to look at the main screen. Void. But I knew it was there, waiting, playing with me. Distress signal. I must send a signal. My trembling fingers scrambled across the console. Communication channel. Static, crackling, an inhuman whisper piercing through the noise. Don't try, hissed a voice woven from the squeal of rusty metal and the moans of the dying. The alarm siren wailed anew, choking. Metal somewhere in the ship's hull groaned, followed by a deafening crunch as if gigantic jaws had clamped down on the prospector. The ship shuddered so violently that I nearly fell from my command chair. The comm panel flashed and went dark. Too late. I looked up. The shadow in the bridge doorway condensed, beginning to take shape. Huge, dark, taller than a man. Dozens of thin, twisting tendrils shot out from its mass and retracted, each ending in something like a sucker or a claw. And the eyes, countless dimly glowing dots staring at me from the swirling darkness. They were like shards of a broken mirror, reflecting not light, but a primal, all-consuming terror. I screamed. My scream was swallowed by the roar of tearing metal and a low guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was one of the tendrils flying swiftly toward my face. My name is Emily Ratajkowski,
captain of the United States Colonial Starship Services search and rescue vessel USCSS Pathfinder. Our ship was an oasis of order and predictability amidst the silent infinitude of space. The Pathfinder's bridge gleamed clean, the soft glow of tactical displays, the even hum of life support systems, the familiar faces of my crew. We were patrolling Sector Delta 9, a rather dull patch of the galaxy, where the only entertainment was competing to see who could spot passing space debris fastest. Marcus Mac Chen, our chief engineer and incorrigible skeptic, was hunched over his console, muttering something about unstable readings from the gravimetric scanner. His dark hair was, as always, in creative disarray, and his thin-rimmed glasses shone on the bridge of his nose. Dr. Lena Hansen, our medic, with her calm smile and kind eyes, was reviewing medical reports, probably trying again to convince Sergeant Rex, Bull Jenkins, our security specialist, to undergo a routine examination. Bull, a former Marine whose muscles seemed capable of ripping steel, preferred dealing with any threat other than medical needles. He stood by the main viewport, arms crossed over his massive chest, his rugged face as impassive as starship armor. Our pilot, Javier Ramirez, a cheerful prankster, was likely currently telling jokes in the mess hall, awaiting his shift. "Captain," Javi's voice cut through the intercom, surprisingly serious. "We have an incoming signal, faint, barely discernible, but it's an automated distress beacon." All conversation on the bridge instantly ceased. I leaned forward in my command chair. "Source, Javi?" "Identifier, USCSS Prospector 7, Captain. A Geocorp geological scout." The name Prospector 7 struck an unpleasant chill in my memory. I quickly called up the information on the main screen. A Geocorp vessel specializing in deep exploration. Missing for 3 weeks. Last known sector? The Hades Belt asteroid field. Mac whistled. The Hades Belt? Not the nicest place for a stroll. That corner has a bad reputation.
He was right. The Hades Belt was notorious for its gravitational anomalies, strange magnetic fields, and, most disturbingly, a string of unexplained disappearances involving small, solitary vessels. Official reports blamed harsh conditions and piloting errors, but among the space truckers, far more sinister rumors circulated. "Lena, Bull, report to me," I ordered, already feeling the familiar tension before the unknown replacing routine. We gathered around the tactical table, where a hologram of the Prospector 7 dimly flickered next to an image of the Hades Belt. "The objective is standard," I began, making sure my voice sounded confident. "Determine the fate of the Prospector's crew. Ascertain the reason for their silence. If possible, restore the ship's functionality, or, at the very least, recover the flight recorders and valuable data. Geocorp pays well for its toys." Bull grunted. "For their toys and their secrets, Captain." His gaze was heavy. He didn't like corporate types, and he had his reasons. Lena looked at the map with concern. 3 weeks. The chances of finding survivors are slim, Emily. "We are obligated to try, Lena. It's our job." I looked them over. Questions? There were none. Everyone knew their duty. "Mac, plot a course to the Prospector's last known coordinates. Maximum speed." "Javi, prepare the Pathfinder for possible maneuvering in difficult conditions." "Everyone else, check your gear. We enter the Hades Belt in 6 hours." A professional bustle filled the bridge, but beneath the layer of professionalism I could feel anxiety brewing. The Hades Belt. Even the name caused a shiver. There was something subtly wrong with that corner of space, and now we were about to plunge into its mysteries. The Prospector's signal was weak, like the last breath of the dying, and I really didn't want to think about what could silence an entire survey vessel.
6 hours later, the Pathfinder entered the Hades Belt. The silent blackness of space was replaced by a chaotic jumble of rock. The asteroids here were not just stones. They were predatory, angular shards of some ancient catastrophe, many miles across. Their surfaces were pitted with craters and deep fissures, like scars from unknown battles. Some of these stone giants phosphoresced faintly, emitting a strange, unnatural, sickly greenish or violet glow, as if the embers of a hellish fire glowed inside them. The navigation sensors were going crazy with magnetic anomalies, and Javi had to constantly correct the course manually, his usual cheerfulness replaced by a focused grimace. "Captain, I've got it," Mac's voice sounded on the bridge, breaking the strained silence. "Prospector 7, about 50,000 miles out, drifting in the gravity shadow of a large asteroid."
An image appeared on the main screen. At first, it was just a dot, but as we approached, it took on ominous contours. Prospector 7 looked like a ghost. The ship was dark, not a single light, no sign of life. The reactors were silent, their thermal signature 0. It was slowly rotating around its axis, surrounded by a flickering cloud of small debris, bits of hull plating, some structural elements, ice, as if an invisible predator had already taken a taste. "Approach closer, Javi," I ordered, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. "Mac, full scan. Look for signs of life, any energy signatures." "Scanning, Captain," Mac responded, his fingers flying across the console. "Nothing. Absolute silence. Internal systems are de-energized. Atmosphere, there's residual pressure, but it's near 0 in most compartments. Looks like multiple hull breaches." We closed the distance to within a few miles. Now the Prospector's damage was visible to the naked eye, and it was not what you would expect to see from an asteroid collision or equipment failure. Jagged holes gaped in its titanium hull, the edges bent outward as if something massive had burst out from inside. Other sections of the plating were melted, not like from laser fire or an explosion. The metal looked as if it had been licked by an impossibly hot, acidic tongue, leaving smooth, bubbling scars. And everywhere, those eerie scratches, deep furrows running along the hull, as if giant claws had raked across it, stripping layers of armor. "That doesn't look like an accident," Bull muttered, his voice rough. He had seen many wrecked ships, but this was different. "Looks more like something tore it apart." Lena stared silently at the screen, her face pale. Even from thousands of miles away, an aura of desolation and terror emanated from the crippled ship. "Mac, what about those energy fluctuations you mentioned?" "They're still there, Captain. Very strange readings. Unstable, pulsing. The source, it seems to be somewhere inside the Prospector. I can't determine the exact nature. It doesn't match anything in our database." Mac frowned, peering at his monitors. "It sounds like almost an organic resonance, if that's even possible from an inanimate object, or from something pretending to be inanimate." "Organic resonance?" I exchanged glances with Lena. It sounded absurd, but after what I'd seen, I was ready to believe anything. "Is the docking port intact?" I asked Javi. "Outwardly, yes, Captain, but I can't get a response signal from their systems. We'll have to dock manually and pray the internal airlock isn't blocked or damaged." The silence on the bridge became even heavier. Prospector 7 silently gazed at us with its dark viewports, like a skull cast up on the shore of the cosmic ocean. And somewhere within that dead hull lurked the source of the strange signals, and possibly the answer to what happened here. An answer that my gut feeling told me we wouldn't like at all. "Bull, Lena, Mac, prepare for boarding," I commanded. "Standard gear, plus heavy weapons for Bull, and take extra sensors for Mac. I'm going with you." No one objected. In this situation, the captain should be the first to step aboard the unknown. We didn't know what awaited us inside the crippled ship, but one thing was clear. The story of the Prospector 7 was far from over, and we had just become part of it. The docking went surprisingly smoothly, although Javi had to sweat, manually aligning the Pathfinder with the helplessly drifting Prospector. When our airlocks finally connected with a dull metallic clang, a heavy silence settled on the bridge. We could only hear our own breathing in our environmental helmets. Pressure in the Prospector's docking porting's almost zero, Captain. Looks like a decompression there, but the main airlock seems to be holding. Open the outer hatch, Mac, carefully, I ordered. With a hiss and grind, our hatch opened, revealing the Prospector's inner airlock. It was covered in frost and some dark smears. Mac, using the docking module's manipulators, turned the emergency release handle. The hatch yielded with a strained groan, and we stepped into the transition chamber. Cold. It hit instantly, penetrating even the thermal insulation of our suits. The temperature here was barely higher than in open space. Dim emergency lamps on the Prospector's walls flickered erratically, casting jerky shadows that danced like evil spirits. The air, if it could be called that, was thin and carried a strange mix of odors. Sharp ozone from short circuits, the acrid smell of burnt wiring and plastic, and something else. A faint but persistent, nauseatingly sweet organic stench. The smell of decay, but not human. Something else. Alien. Checking atmosphere. Lena's voice sounded muffled through the comm. Slight oxygen content, a lot of nitrogen, traces of unidentified volatile compounds, definitely not breathable. We passed through the inner airlock into the Prospector's first corridor. A gloom prevailed here. Most lighting panels were shattered or non-functional. Shards of glass and plastic crunched on the magnetic boots on the metal floor. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the clang of our boots and our own ragged breathing.
The scene that met us spoke of panic and desperate struggle. Overturned toolboxes, control panels ripped from the walls, scattered personal belongings. One of the passages was roughly barricaded with metal sheets and some wreckage of furniture. Deep, jagged scratches were visible on the walls, as if an animal with huge claws had been at work here. And everywhere, those dark splatters. Some were reddish-brown, resembling dried blood. Others were almost black, oily, with a metallic sheen. "No bodies," Bull muttered, his pulse rifle nervously shaking in his hands. "Where did they all go?" That was the most disturbing question. The ship was empty. Not just abandoned, it was scoured clean, as if its inhabitants had been vaporized or dragged away somewhere, leaving behind only silent evidence of terror. We moved slowly, covering each other. I led the way, my plasma pistol ready. Mac followed, his scanner constantly chirping, recording anomalies. Lena and Bull brought up the rear. Every rustle, every creak made us flinch. The sensation of an invisible presence grew stronger. It seemed the shadows themselves were watching us, breathing down our necks. "Captain, the energy fluctuations are intensifying," Mac reported, as we reached the central corridor junction. "The source is somewhere ahead. Looks like the geological lab area or the mining bay." "We'll head there. But first, we need to check the bridge. Maybe the flight log will give us some answers." The path to the bridge was even more heavily obstructed. The door had been ripped off its hinges and lay on the floor, warped as if it were paper. The same chaos reigned inside the bridge. Chairs were torn from their moorings, consoles smashed. The main viewport was covered in a network of cracks, through which the ominous silhouettes of the Hades Belt asteroids were visible. The flight recorder looks like they tried to destroy it, Mac pointed to a charred and melted niche where the black box was usually stored. But nearby on the floor lay Captain Carmichael's personal data pad. The screen was cracked, but the casing looked intact. "Try to extract anything you can from that, Mac," I said. "Lena and Bull, look around. Look for anything that might shed light on these songs from the stone and hallucinations." While Mac fiddled with the data pad, I walked around the bridge. A strange feeling persisted. This wasn't just a disaster site. This was a slaughterhouse. But who or what could do this to a well-armed and trained crew? And why were there no traces of the victims themselves? The silence was deafening. A dead, absolute silence, broken only by the soft hum of my own suit. I felt a chill run down my spine, despite the working thermal regulator. This ship was soaked in fear. Thick, sticky, like that black residue on the walls. And that fear was beginning to seep into us. "Got it, Captain." Mac's voice pulled me out of my brooding thoughts. "The data pad is heavily damaged, but I managed to recover one audio file. Captain Carmichael's last entry. Sounds like a personal journal, not an official report." We clustered around Mac as he played the sound through his wrist computer's external speaker. First came the crackle of static, and then the voice. Captain David Carmichael's voice. It was broken, full of horror and despair. We listened as he frantically described the chaos aboard, muttering about eyes in the walls, songs from the stone, and "it changes shape." The recording cut off with a desperate scream and a sound like the roar of something massive, followed by deafening static. When the recording ended, a heavy silence fell on the bridge. Even Bull, usually unflappable, looked shaken. "Songs from the stone, eyes in the walls. What in the hell happened here?" he croaked. "It sounds like they encountered something not of this world," Lena said quietly, her face white as a sheet. "Hallucinations? Mass psychosis? Or something real that caused the hallucinations," Mac countered, his eyes glued to the data pad. Carmichael didn't sound insane. He sounded scared to death. "All right," I forced my voice to sound firm, though my gut clenched with dark premonition. "This recording confirms our worst fears. We need more information." We split up. "Mac, you stay here. Try to dig into the bridge systems. Maybe something survived. Lena, check the medical bay. Look for logs, records, anything that might explain these songs from the stone and hallucinations. Bull, you're with me. We'll sweep the crew quarters and main corridors. We're looking for any trace of the crew. Any clues. Comms every 10 minutes. If anything goes wrong, report immediately." We separated, and the suffocating silence of the dead ship crashed down on us again. The bridge, despite the wreckage, felt almost cozy compared to the dark, gaping emptiness of the corridors. Bull and I advanced cautiously, lighting the way with our helmet lamps. The crew quarters were a sad sight. Signs of hasty flight everywhere. Scattered personal items, overturned bunks, open lockers. In one cabin, a child's photograph lay on the floor. A smiling boy about 5 years old. A cold knot formed in my throat. "Nothing, Captain," Bull reported, exiting another cabin. "Just mess and this," he pointed to the wall. There, among the jagged scratches, was a strange symbol, carved with something sharp. A spiral with multiple rays extending from it, resembling both a galaxy and some kind of multi-legged creature. "What do you make of it?" I asked. Bull shrugged. "No idea. Looks like a madman's drawing."
or some cultist symbol. Soon we came across what Bull called the last line of defense. One of the corridors was blocked by a massive barricade of metal crates, broken equipment, and even mattresses from the cabins. In front of the barricade lay makeshift pikes sharpened from pipe sections and several depleted power cells from standard hand tools, clearly adapted as weapons. "They fought here," Bull stated, examining the barricade. "A desperate fight." "Against whom? Or what?" I muttered. Captain Carmichael's answer, "It changes shape," haunted me. "Captain, this is Lena," the medic's voice crackled in my earpiece. "I'm in the medical bay. It's all very strange here." "What is it, Lena?" "I found medical journals. It looks like several crew members started having problems a few days before communications were lost. Rapidly progressing paranoia, auditory and visual hallucinations. The doctor tried to manage it with sedatives, but it only got worse. There's a record of an emergency surgery. They apparently tried to relieve brain pressure on one of the geologists, Arden Vale. But the description of the symptoms doesn't match any known psychiatric disorder or poisoning." Lena's voice trembled. "And also, there are signs of a struggle here, and blood. A lot of blood." "Captain, it's Mac. I found something," the technician reported, almost simultaneously. "It seems the main ship power was disconnected, not due to damage, but manually, at the main distribution board. And I've pinpointed the source of those strange energy fluctuations. It's located in the mining bay, in the aft section of the ship. The signal is very powerful and unstable. I recommend extreme caution." The mining bay, the place where the Prospector 7 stored and processed its retrieved samples, and the source of the anomalous energy. "Understood, Mac. Lena, Bull, meet me at the entrance to the mining bay. Mac, stay on comms. Report any changes." We moved towards the stern. The feeling of being watched didn't fade. It intensified. Every dark corner, every shadow seemed to hide something hostile. The corridors grew more dilapidated, the walls more scratched. The air seemed colder and thicker, saturated with that nauseating odor, which was now much stronger. We were approaching the heart of this nightmare, and I wasn't sure we were ready to see what lurked there. The doors to the mining bay were warped and slightly ajar, as if something had tried to force them open from the inside. A faint, pulsing violet light seeped from the gap, casting trembling, distorted shadows on the opposite corridor wall. The nauseatingly sweet organic stench here was so strong it triggered a gag reflex, despite the suit filters. Bull, Lena, and I froze at the entrance, exchanging worried glances. "Mac, are you sure the source is in there?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the surrounding silence. "Absolutely, Captain. Readings are maxed out. Whatever it is, it's right there in the center of the bay." Steeling myself, I pushed the heavy door. It yielded with a long groan of scraping metal. The Prospector 7's mining bay was huge, like a small hangar. Racks of rock samples, containers of drilling equipment, and ore transporters lined the walls. But now all of it was covered in a layer of dust and small debris, and in the center, on a specialized platform surrounded by broken tools and overturned tables, it lay, the source of the light and anomalous energy. It was the artifact. It was about 3 feet in diameter, shaped like a massive, fractured geode or some giant fossilized egg. Its outer surface was matte black, riddled with deep cracks from which the unearthly violet glow emanated, mixed with flashes of deep indigo and blood red. The light was not constant. It pulsed like a massive, diseased heart, and with each pulse, complex shimmering patterns ran across the artifact's surface like living veins. It looked like it was breathing. The artifact was encased in a containment cage, obviously intended for transporting unstable samples. But the cage was damaged. Several energy emitters were broken. The force field flickered and was missing in places, barely restraining what lay within. A low, barely audible hum emanated from the artifact, felt more by the entire body than by the ears.
a vibration that penetrated the bones and caused a strange unease. And then there was the feeling of presence, as if this stone was not just a stone, but something living, intelligent, watching us with its invisible eyes. "Oh my God," Lena breathed out, her voice full of reverent horror. Bull silently gripped his rifle, his gaze fixed on the artifact. Even he, the hardened veteran, looked stunned. Mac, who was watching everything through my helmet cam, whistled. "What a find. Never seen anything like it. The energy signature is just off the charts. It's something utterly alien." Next to the platform where the artifact rested, another data pad lay on the floor, covered in a layer of dust. I cautiously picked it up. The screen was intact. It was the personal journal of Dr. Arden Vale, the chief geologist of Prospector 7, the same one Lena's records indicated they tried to perform a trepanation on.
With trembling fingers, I activated the last available entry. Vale's voice, initially full of scientific excitement, quickly turned to anxiety, and then outright horror. Entry 37. We found it, inside asteroid X-17 in its very core, a unique object unlike anything seen before. Preliminary analysis shows a complex crystalline structure, but with clear organic inclusions. It resonates. I can feel it. Captain Carmichael authorized bringing it aboard for further study. This is the discovery of the century. The next entry was made a few days later. Vale's voice no longer sounded so confident. Entry 41. Strange. The artifact, we called it the Heart of Hades. It reacts to our presence. When someone gets close, its pulsation quickens. Several crew members complain of headaches and strange dreams. Myself, sometimes I think I hear whispering, quiet, like wind in an empty corridor. It must just be fatigue. Then the entries became increasingly disjointed, panicked. Entry 45. It sings to me. The stone sings. These songs, they penetrate the brain, show images, forms made of pure thought from the darkest corners of the subconscious. Fear takes flesh. I've seen things that shouldn't exist. Jones says he sees eyes in the walls. Many eyes. They are watching. They are learning. It is learning through us. The final entry was short, almost intelligible. Vale's voice broke into a scream against the background of some kind of crash and inhuman sounds. Entry 47. It's here. It broke free. Not a stone. It's a gateway. Eyes. So many eyes. No! The recording ended with a heartbreaking shriek that made us all flinch. I lowered the datapad. My hands were shaking. Everything clicked into place now. The artifact. It was the cause of everything. It wasn't just an energy source, as Max suggested. It was something far more sinister. A gateway, as Vale said, or a catalyst. The source of the nightmare that doomed Prospector 7. And in that moment, as if in response to our thoughts, the artifact's violet glow flared brighter, its pulsation becoming rapid and furious. The low hum intensified, turning into a near-infrasonic roar that pressed on our eardrums. We had found the epicenter of the catastrophe, and now we were in its very heart. The artifact's pulsation grew more intense, the violet light flooding the mining bay, distorting shadows and twisting familiar objects into grotesque silhouettes. The low hum escalated into a palpable vibration. The floor trembled beneath our feet. The air seemed to thicken, becoming heavy like water. We stood transfixed, unable to tear our gaze from the shimmering heart of darkness.
Captain! Mac's voice in my headset was strained, punctuated by static. The energy emissions from the artifact, they're maxed out. Something is happening. And then I saw it, or rather, what it became. In the far, darkest corner of the bay, where a pile of old containers cast an especially deep shadow, something stirred. It wasn't merely a trick of light and shadow. The shadow itself began to coalesce, to solidify, separating from the wall as if a chunk of darkness had come alive. It grew, stretching upward, gaining volume. It was unlike any living thing I knew, a formless, undulating mass, blacker than the blackness of space itself, from which thin, flexible tendrils shot out and retracted, resembling tentacles or twisted limbs. They bent at unnatural angles, moving with a chilling, fluid grace. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed dimly glowing points flickering on its surface and vanishing instantly. Eyes. The multitude of eyes Vale spoke of. What is that?" Lena whispered, her voice shaking with terror. She stumbled back a step, tripping over some debris. Bull reacted instantly. Marine instinct took over. He raised his pulse rifle and opened fire. Bright plasma bursts struck the dark mass, but instead of causing damage, they seemed to pass right through or get bogged down in the undulating substance like quicksand, leaving only short, sizzling flashes. The creature, or whatever it was, made no sound of pain. Instead, it emitted a low, vibrating hum, the same one we heard from the artifact, but now louder, richer, and carrying something else. A feeling of primal terror, nausea, and sudden irrational panic seized me. My head spun, my knees buckled. I saw Lena clamp her hands over her ears, her face contorted in pain. Even Bull, continuing to fire, staggered. The dark mass began to move towards us, slowly but inexorably, gliding across the floor like a giant amoeba. Its appendages writhed, probing the space ahead. It didn't run, didn't attack in the usual sense. It was observing, studying. "Retreat!" I yelled, trying to shout over the maddening hum. "Back towards the exit!"
We backed away, firing. My shots from the plasma pistol had the same effect as Bull's rifle. 0. The creature continued to advance, its shape constantly shifting, stretching out then contracting, as if it were made of liquid shadow. And then it did something completely unexpected. One of its appendages shot out rapidly, touching a metal container near the wall. The container shuddered, rippled, and for a moment its surface became as black and undulating as the creature itself. Then the appendage retracted, and the container remained standing, apparently intact, but a huge melted hole now gaped on its side, the edges smoking. Is it absorbing matter? Or copying it? Mac muttered, his voice full of awe and fear. He was watching everything through my camera. The creature was now 10 feet away. Its hum was unbearable. I felt panic starting to flood my mind, pushing out all rational thought. I had to do something, and fast. Suddenly, the dark mass stopped. It paused for a moment, as if listening. Then, with a chilling, silent speed, it darted aside, towards one of the large ventilation shafts gaping in the wall. Its form stretched, became thinner, and it literally flowed into the dark opening, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The hum subsided. The vibration ceased. All that remained was the ringing in our ears and the nauseating taste in our mouths. We stood, breathing heavily, staring at the empty vent shaft. "What was that?" Bull finally managed to gasp, lowering his rifle. His face was slick with sweat. No one answered. We had no answers. Mac broke the silence first. "Captain, the artifact. After that thing vanished, its pulse got brighter,
and the energy emissions, they stabilized at a higher level, as if it recharged. I looked at the artifact. It did glow more steadily, more confidently, and its hum, though quiet, now seemed satisfied. A cold dread ran down my spine. We hadn't just found the source of the problem, we had woken it up. Or rather, we had encountered what it had spawned, and that something was now loose on this dead ship, along with us. The initial shock wore off, yielding to a chilling realization. We were trapped. Aboard a ghost ship, with non-functional systems, cut off from the Pathfinder, and now we were being hunted by a creature that defies the laws of physics, that can change shape, and possibly feeds on fear itself.
"We need to get off this ship," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though everything inside me was clenched with a dreadful foreboding. Immediately. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. This ship had already become our tomb, and its new occupant had only just begun its game. "Mac, is there any chance of restoring communications with the Pathfinder, or even starting the Prospector's engines to get away from that artifact?" My voice was desperate as we hastily retreated from the ominous mining bay. Now every dark corner felt like a threat, every shadow a potential hiding spot for that formless horror. "Tryin', Captain," Mac replied, his voice breaking with heavy static. "But after the energy surge from the artifact, most of the Prospector's systems have completely failed. Short circuits everywhere. It seems that thing, it's somehow connected to the ship's energy, or the artifact itself is actively jamming everything." We reached the central corridor junction, the same place that had felt relatively safe a short time ago. Now, it felt like a trap. The emergency lights flickered even more chaotically. Some went out entirely, plunging sections of the corridors into absolute darkness. "The airlock! We need to get to the docking airlock!" Bull shouted, pointing in the direction we had come from. We rushed there, but before we could run 100 feet, the ship shuddered violently from a heavy impact. The metal bulkheads groaned, and dust and small debris showered from the ceiling. "What was that?" Lena exclaimed, pressing against the wall. I don't know," Mac tried to decipher his wrist computer. "Looks like the external docking port. It's blocked. And not just blocked, it's warped, as if something crushed it." My heart sank. The path to the Pathfinder was cut off. We were trapped. It was at that moment that a stream of something dark and fluid poured out of a ventilation grating above our heads. It splattered onto the floor in front of us, and then rapidly began to gather, forming into something new, even more nightmarish. It resembled a gigantic, distorted spider. 8 long, multi-jointed legs, covered in what looked like black, glossy chitin, supported a bloated, segmented body. Instead of a head, it had a cluster of multifaceted guys that glowed ominously in the gloom, reflecting the light of our lamps. Dozens of eyes, looking in all directions, studying us. The creature emitted a low chittering sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Arachnophobia," Bull muttered, his face contorted with a mixture of disgust and primal fear. He had always hated spiders, even the smallest ones, and this creature seemed to know it. It knows. The arachnoforming horror lunged at us with incredible speed, its limbs drumming on the metal floor like dominoes. We barely managed to leap aside. Bull opened fire, but the creature was too fast and agile. It leapt onto the wall, then onto the ceiling, moving with unnatural ease, as if gravity didn't exist for it. We were trapped in a narrow corridor, and this nightmare darted around us, cutting off our escape routes, its numerous eyes tracking our every move. Its chittering grew louder, mixing with Lena's panicked cries and Bull's curses. "Back, to the engineering bay, it's wider there," I yelled, trying to shoot at the creature, but hitting it was virtually impossible. We retreated, backing away, firing. The spider didn't let up. Its sharp limbs passed inches from our faces several times. At one point, it leapt from the ceiling directly onto Bull. The sergeant roared and struck it with the butt of his rifle. The creature recoiled, but immediately rushed back into the attack. We managed to break through into the more spacious engineering bay, where massive generators and distribution panels stood in rows. There was more room to maneuver here. But the creature wasn't giving up. It pursued us, its chittering echoing through the compartment. Suddenly, it stopped. Its body trembled, rippled, and then began to melt like wax, flowing onto the floor and transforming back into the same black amorphous mass we had seen in the mining bay. The puddle of darkness pulsed and then began to flow into one of the ventilation shafts, disappearing from view. We stood, breathing heavily, disbelieving our eyes. It left again? Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't think for long, Mac replied, checking his scanner readings. Those energy fluctuations, they haven't disappeared. They just moved.
In one such dead-end corridor, a new surprise awaited us. When we rounded a corner, the entire passage ahead was filled with a slowly creeping, undulating mass, resembling a gigantic black mold. It wasn't aggressive, but slowly and inexorably filled the space, cutting off our path. The same nauseating smell and a feeling of crushing claustrophobia emanated from it. We barely managed to retreat before it completely blocked the corridor. The Shadow Strangler, Bull grimly dubbed it. And then there was the mimic. We heard a faint cry from one of the side cabins. The voice was familiar. It was the voice of Emily Carter, one of the Prospector's junior officers whose photo we had seen. Lena, who I knew had a younger sister around the same age as Emily in the photo, rushed toward the door. "Emily? Is that you? We're here to help," she cried. The cabin door creaked open, and the pale, frightened face of a young woman appeared in the gap. "Help, please, he's here." Lena had already reached out to open the door wider, but I managed to stop her. Something was wrong. The woman's eyes, they were too glossy, too still. And that smell, it had intensified again. "Lena, stop," I yelled. At that very moment, the face in the doorway distorted, features blurring, and several thin black tentacles shot out from the gap, trying to grab Lena. We recoiled. Bull fired a burst from his rifle at the door. The tentacles retracted, and the same low, vibrating hum we had heard before came from the cabin. It tried to trick us," Lena whispered, her face white as chalk. "Used her image." Horror, claustrophobia, paranoia. These feelings became our constant companions. We realized we were dealing not with a single monster, but with something that could take any shape, any form, using our own fears and memories against us. The hunt had begun in earnest, and we were the prey. We found temporary refuge in an old server room, one of the few whose door still responded to manual locking. Massive racks of long-dead processors and databanks created a semblance of a maze, offering some illusion of protection. Outside in the corridors, we could hear distant rustling, creaking, and that low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from the artifact itself, pulsing in sync with our quickened hearts. "It's playing with us," Bull rasped, checking the charge of his rifle. His hands were shaking slightly, something I'd never noticed before. "It knows our fears. That spider, it wasn't random." The artifact. Mac tapped his finger on his wrist computer where the Prospector's schematic flickered with a pulsing dot in the mining bay. It's like a beacon. When the creature attacks or plays with us, the artifact's pulsation increases, as if it's directing it or feeding on our emotions. "Our fears," Lena corrected him, her voice quiet but firm. She was trying to treat a shallow scratch on Bull's arm, left by one of the mimic's tendrils. Captain Carmichael talked about it. Fear takes flesh. And it was true. The creature wasn't just hunting us physically. It was penetrating our minds, turning our deepest nightmares inside out. Mac was the first to break. He had always prided himself on his rationalism, his ability to find a logical explanation for everything. But here, aboard the Prospector, his logic failed. He began seeing things that weren't there. The control panels on his computer showed false data. Sensors lied. Ship schematics warped. He muttered about matrix failures, about phantom signals. His biggest fear, technical failure at a critical moment, his inability to control the situation, now haunted him awake. Several times he jumped up in a panic, yelling that the doors were locked, that we were entombed, even though I had checked them myself moments before. Lena also began hearing sounds. The faint cry of a child. She hadn't told anyone, but I knew. She had lost her young niece in an accident several years ago. That cry haunted her, drifting from dark corners, from behind closed doors. She clenched her teeth, trying not to show it, but I saw her pupils dilate as she listened intently to the silence, waiting to hear that heartbreaking sound again. Even I wasn't immune. I started seeing him, Captain Carmichael. His ghost, silent and condemning, appeared in the periphery of my vision, in dark doorways, peering over my shoulder as I tried to devise a plan. The pressure of responsibility, the fear of failing my crew, of repeating the Prospector's fate, all took form in that silent, spectral reproach. The artifact in the mining bay seemed to revel in this. With every surge of our fear, with every hallucination, its distant hum grew slightly louder, its pulsation on Mac's schematic slightly brighter. It feasted on our emotions, growing stronger. Distrust began to seep into our ranks. We started eyeing each other suspiciously. What if one of us wasn't who they claimed to be? What if the creature had learned not only to mimic appearance, but to infiltrate deeper? I pushed these thoughts away, but they returned again and again, like persistent flies. "We can't stay here," I said, trying to make my voice sound confident, though dread coiled in my gut. "We need a plan. A radical plan." Bull looked at me heavily. "What plan, Captain? We're trapped. That thing could be anywhere. Anyone."
"Destroy the artifact," I blurted out. "If it's the source, we have to destroy it, along with this ship if necessary." Max snapped his head up. "The Prospector's reactor? It's an old model, but if we trigger an active core overload, yes, it's possible. The explosion would be powerful enough to atomize this ship, and the artifact with it." "But how do we get to the reactor room?" Lena asked. "It's at the opposite end of the ship, through all those nightmares." "We fight our way through," Bull replied, and for a moment the old fire sparked in his eyes. "Better to die fighting than sit here waiting for that thing to eat our brains." It was a desperate, suicidal plan, but it was our only chance. A chance not only to save ourselves, if we were lucky, but to stop this horror from escaping the confines of the Prospector. We began to prepare. Mac tried to restore some internal comms so we could coordinate if separated. Bull checked our remaining ammunition and fashioned improvised grenades from flares and some chemicals found in the lab. Lena treated minor wounds and handed out stimulants. The fear hadn't gone away. It sat deep within us, like a splinter, but now it was mixed with grim determination. We were on the brink of death, but we wouldn't surrender without a fight. The mind games were over. The real war for survival was beginning. And the cost of defeat was too high. Not just our lives, but possibly the sanity of anyone who might encounter this cosmic horror in the future. All right, here's the plan. I spread out a heavily damaged but still readable schematic of the prospector on the server room floor, which Mac had managed to print from one of the surviving terminals. We're here in Sector Gamma 7. The reactor room, it's here in Sector Omega 12 in the very stern. That's about half a mile through corridors and technical tunnels. I looked around at my comrades. Their faces were tense, drawn. A sleepless night, constant fear, and psychological pressure from the creature had taken their toll. But in their eyes, I also saw a glint of that determination Bull had spoken of. The path won't be easy, I continued. Judging by what we've seen, that thing controls most of the ship. It will try to stop us, using all its tricks. I have something that might help. Bull nodded toward the makeshift devices he'd assembled from mining equipment scraps and signal rockets. They're not exactly grenades, more like powerful flashbang charges with added magnesium shavings. If that thing is sensitive to light or sharp noises, this might disorient it. At least give us a few seconds.
Mac nodded. I managed to partially restore power to some main conduits. It's not enough to start the main systems, but I can try to remotely open and close some of the blast doors along our path. If we're lucky, we can cut off the creature or lock it in a compartment. His fingers rapidly moved over his wrist computer's keyboard. But it's risky. Any interference with the power system might attract its attention. Risk is all we have left, Mac, I said. Lena, your job is to monitor our condition. Stimulants, painkillers, have everything ready. And if any of us starts to succumb to the hallucinations, you must snap them out of it, by any means necessary. Lena nodded resolutely, her gaze steady. Understood, Captain. There was no debate. Everyone understood this was likely a one-way ticket, but the thought of the artifact and the creature it spawned escaping this cursed ship was scarier than death itself. We were the last line of defense, however melodramatic that sounded. Move fast, but cautiously, I gave the final instructions. Stay together, cover each other. If we encounter it, Bull uses his charges, we retreat and find another route. The main goal is the reactor. Get to it at all costs. We left the server room, once again submerging ourselves into the ominous, dimly lit corridors of the prospector. The silence pressed in. Every rustle made us jump. Our helmet lamps carved scraps of the ship's former life out of the darkness, abandoned tools, scattered papers, and stains on the walls hinting at the recent tragedy. We covered the first few 100 yards without incident. Mac, swearing under his breath, managed to open massive blast doors in front of us that should have been permanently locked, but the tension mounted with every step. We knew the creature was near. It was waiting. And it didn't keep us waiting long. As we entered a long, narrow technical tunnel filled with pipes and cables, the light from our headlamps suddenly flickered and died. We were plunged into pitch blackness. "Mac, what happened?" I yelled, instinctively pulling out my plasma pistol. "I don't know, Captain. Power surge. Something big is moving toward us through the tunnel." In the darkness, the low, vibrating hum we knew so well began. And then, scraping. A loud metallic scraping, as if something enormous was dragging claws along the tunnel walls. "Bull, prepare a charge," I ordered. Flash. A deafening bang. Bull's charge briefly illuminated the tunnel, and we saw it. It took up almost the entire space, a slowly crawling, segmented mass, resembling a giant centipede or worm covered in shiny black armor. Its numerous short limbs scraped against the metal, making that awful sound. And at the front, where a head should be, gaped a huge, circular maw full of razor-sharp teeth. "Back!" I screamed. We scrambled backward, stumbling in the darkness. The creature was right behind us, its scraping getting closer. We burst out of the tunnel into a small distribution hub, and Mac, somehow, managed to slam the blast door shut behind us. A deafening thud sounded on the other side. The door shuddered, but held. We stood, breathing heavily, listening to the furious pounding and scraping from the other side. "It knows we're here," Bull gasped, "and it won't stop." "We need to find another way." Mac frantically examined the schematic on his computer. "There's another technical corridor parallel to this one, but it's longer and, according to reports, partially collapsed." A sense of doom mixed with desperate resolve hung in the air. Every step brought us closer to the goal, but also closer to a confrontation with the embodiment of horror itself. This ship had become a labyrinth of death, and the Minotaur dwelling within was hungry. But we continued to move forward, driven by the faint hope of redemption, that our sacrifice would not be in vain. The alternative technical corridor was a true test of endurance and claustrophobia. It was narrow, barely enough room to walk single file, and indeed partially blocked by broken pipes and ripped-off panels. The air here was stale, heavy, mixed with metallic dust, and that same ever-present, nauseating smell. We moved slowly, constantly risking snagging sharp edges or falling into some hole in the floor. "Mac, how much further to the reactor room?" I asked, trying to catch my breath after another difficult section. "To the schematic, we're about halfway, Captain, but this corridor, it feels alive, narrowing, then widening. I wouldn't be surprised if that thing had something prepared for us here too." As if in response to his words, a strange noise echoed ahead, deep in the corridor. Not a hum, not a scrape, but something like slurping and a wet smack. We froze, listening. The sounds were approaching. I signaled Bull to be ready. He nodded, clutching another flashbang charge. It appeared around the corner. This time, the creature took a form that froze the blood in my veins. It was a gigantic, blind thing, resembling a massive slug or grub, about 10 feet long. Its body was pale, almost translucent, and through the thin skin, one could see pulsating internal organs. It had no eyes, but its entire front was covered in rows of vibrating sensory antennae that quivered, feeling the air. And in the middle of this head was a huge vertical slit, a maw, from which that disgusting slurping sound emanated. The creature slowly crawled toward us, leaving a glossy, slimy trail. It was clearly guided by sound. "Quiet," I whispered. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." We froze, afraid to even breathe. The slug-like creature approached, its sensors vibrating inches from my face. I could feel its fetid breath. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like it would hear. Any careless sound, any rustle, and that maw would clamp down on one of us. It paused, as if listening, and then slowly began to crawl past us. We stood like stone statues until its tail disappeared around the bend. Only then did I allow myself to exhale. It didn't notice us?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "It seems to be genuinely blind and only reacts to sound," Mac replied. "We need to be absolutely silent." But silence on this ship was a luxury. Just as we nearly reached the end of the corridor, a ripped metal panel screeched under Mac's foot. The sound wasn't loud, but in the surrounding silence, it sounded like a gunshot. A furious hiss instantly came from around the corner, and the blind creature rushed back with incredible speed for its size. "Run!" I yelled. We bolted forward, toward the corridor exit, but the creature was faster. It was gaining on us. And then Bull did what I didn't expect. He stopped abruptly, turned around, and stepped toward the monster. "Bull, no!" I screamed. "Go! I'll hold it off," he roared, raising his rifle. There was no fear in his eyes, only fierce determination. His greatest fear of being useless, a burden to the team, was now driving him to certain death. He had to prove he wasn't. He opened fire, aiming at the creature's vibrating sensors. The thing roared with pain and fury, its blind head whipping side to side.
Bull kept shooting, retreating toward a side branch of the corridor, leading the monster away. "Bull!" Lena started toward him, but I grabbed her arm. "Go! He gave us a chance! We can't waste it!" With a heavy heart, we sprinted toward the corridor exit, leaving Bull alone with his nightmare. For a few seconds behind us, we could still hear gunfire, the creature's furious roar, and then Bull's heartbreaking scream, cut short mid-word. And silence. We burst out of the technical corridor into a spacious cargo bay cluttered with containers. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with sweat. We had lost Bull. He sacrificed himself for us. But there was no time to grieve. From the ventilation shafts across the bay, they began to fall. Dozens, if not hundreds of small, rapidly moving creatures resembling animated chunks of metal mixed with organic scraps. They were rat-sized, with multiple thin, sharp limbs and a single red, glowing eye. They emitted a piercing, grinding sound and swarmed toward us. "Scrappers!" Max shouted, firing a sidearm. We fought back as best we could, but there were too many of them. They latched onto our suits, trying to chew through the armor, scrambling underfoot, inhibiting our movement. It was absolute hell. "To the reactor! Faster!" I screamed, fighting my way through the teeming mass.
Every step was a struggle. Every minute on this ship felt like an eternity. The labyrinth of death did not want to let us go, and I wasn't sure we could escape alive. But the thought of Bull's sacrifice spurred us forward. We couldn't let him die in vain. Having broken through the swarming horde of scrappers, we finally reached the massive armored doors of the reactor room. Me, Mac, and Lena. That was all that remained of our rescue squad. Lena was injured. One of the creatures had latched onto her leg and, though the suit held, the deep laceration was bleeding badly. She winced in pain but held on, leaning on Mac. Bull, his sacrifice weighed heavily on our hearts. "Mac, open it," I ordered, breathing heavily. My plasma pistol was almost depleted. My suit was covered in scratches and dents. Mac connected his computer to the door control panel. "1 second, Captain. Systems here are also damaged, but..." "Got it." With a prolonged screech and the hiss of hydraulics, the massive doors began to slide apart, revealing the Prospector's heart, its thermonuclear reactor. A huge cylindrical unit, wrapped in a network of pipes and cables, hummed dimly in the center of the spacious, multi-level compartment. The control panels were smashed, and emergency lights barely illuminated the room, creating an ominous, spectral atmosphere. It was at that moment that the artifact, as if sensing our intentions, delivered its main strike. The air in the reactor compartment thickened, becoming heavy, like mercury. The low, vibrating hum we had heard from the artifact now filled the entire space. It came not from the mining bay, but here, from the very center of the room. In front of the reactor, where there had just been empty space, darkness began to condense. It swirled, growing, absorbing the dim light of the emergency lamps. It was him, the artifact's avatar, its most powerful, most concentrated manifestation. The creature was gigantic, 15 feet tall, and its shape was constantly changing, flowing like a nightmare. It was woven from the same liquid shadow as its previous incarnations, but now shimmering violet and blood-red threads of light emanating seemingly from the artifact itself were woven into its mass. Dozens of tentacles, claws, and spikes shot out from its formless body, only to retract instantly. And the eyes. Countless dimly glowing dots studded its entire surface, watching us from all sides at once, radiating cold, unhuman intelligence and boundless malice. "Mother of God," Mac gasped, his face white as a sheet. Lena cried out and recoiled, but I held her steady. "Mac, to the main console. Initiate the overload. Lena, cover him.
I'll distract that thing. We had no time for fear, no time for doubt. This was our last chance. Mac, staggering, rushed to the main reactor control console, which, thankfully, looked less damaged than the others. Lena, fighting through the pain, raised her pistol, ready to fire. I stepped forward toward the Avatar. "Hey, Ugly, I'm here. Come on, try to get me." The creature emitted a low, rumbling sound that shook the walls. It slowly turned toward me, its numerous eyes focusing. I opened fire with my nearly depleted pistol. The plasma charges struck its dark mass, but, as before, did no visible harm, only causing slight ripples on its surface. The Avatar did not attack physically. Instead, it struck at my mind. Suddenly, the reactor room vanished. I was on the Pathfinder's bridge, but it was empty and dark. Outside the viewport, not stars, but the same swirling darkness of the Hades belt. And voices, the voices of my crew, full of terror and accusation. "You abandoned us, Emily. You're responsible for our deaths. You couldn't save us." I saw their faces distorting by fear, their hands reaching for me. "No, that's not true!" I screamed, trying to push away the visions. Then the scene shifted. I was a little girl again, lost in a dark forest my grandmother told me about. Trees turned into monsters, shadows came alive, and a chilling whisper called my name from the deepest thicket, my oldest, most private childhood fear. I fell to my knees, clamping my hands over my ears. Pain, fear, despair overwhelmed me. "Captain, hold on!" Through the veil of horror, I heard Max shout, "It feeds on your fear. Don't let it win." His words, like a bucket of cold water, somewhat brought me back to reality. Fear. The artifact feeds on fear. If we succumb, it will grow stronger. I forced myself to look up. Visions still danced before my eyes, but I tried to focus on reality. On Mac, frantically working at the console, on Lena, who, gritting her teeth, fired at the tendrils reaching for Mac. I'm okay, I shouted, getting back on my feet. I knew it was a lie, but I had to fight. The Avatar seemed surprised by my resistance. It let out its rumbling sound again, and several particularly large, sharp tentacles shot out from its mass, lunging toward us. Lena screamed. One of the tendrils wrapped around her injured leg, squeezing it. I rushed toward her, shooting at the tendril, but my shots were too weak.
"Mac, faster. A little more. Almost there. Overload sequence initiated. 5 minutes to critical mass," Mac yelled, without taking his eyes off the console. 5 minutes. An eternity. The Avatar, as if realizing its time was short, erupted in a frenzy. Tendrils whipped around the compartment, smashing equipment, trying to reach us. One of them struck my shoulder, throwing me against the wall. My head rang, my vision darkened. But I saw Lena, pushing past the pain, grab a large syringe from her medical kit and, with a scream, plunge it into the tendril holding her leg. The tendril twitched, blackened, and fell away like a dry branch. "Take that," Lena gasped, her face contorted with pain and fury. The Avatar roared. Its form began to destabilize. The dark mass rippled, and the violet flashes within it grew brighter, more chaotic. "It's weakening," Max shouted. "The overload is destabilizing its connection to the artifact." This was our chance. The final battle in the heart of a dying ship, in the heart of horror itself, and we had to prevail. 3 minutes to detonation. Mac's voice sounded like a death knell amidst the chaos of the reactor room. The artifact's avatar was in agony. Its gigantic, shifting form writhed, shattering into chunks of darkness, only to reassemble immediately. But each time it became smaller, its movements more chaotic. Tendrils flailed wildly, smashing everything around, but without the previous focused intent.
It seemed its very essence was being torn apart by the increasing energy of the reactor. Lena, despite the horrific wound, continued to fire, covering Mac, who was still frantically working at the console, trying to speed up the process, or perhaps find a way out. I, fighting through the pain in my shoulder and the ringing in my head, also kept firing, aiming at the largest clumps of darkness, where I thought its numerous eyes were concentrated. "Captain, there's one escape pod in Sector Omega-9, near the reactor room. I managed to feed emergency power to it. 1 in a million chance it survived and will launch, but it's better than nothing."
Omega-9. It was very close, but the raging avatar blocked the way.
2 minutes! "Lena, Mac, follow me, break through," I yelled, pointing to one of the side doors that, according to the schematic, led to the corridor we needed. We charged forward. The avatar, as if sensing our intent, let out a prolonged, soul-chilling wail, and its last, most powerful tendril shot out from its decaying mass, thick as a tree trunk and covered in razor-sharp spikes. It hurtled toward us with incredible speed. I managed to shove Lena and Mac aside, but I couldn't dodge myself. The tendril struck my side with such force that I heard the crunch of my ribs. The pain was blinding. The world went dark for a moment. I fell, gasping for breath, feeling something warm and sticky spreading beneath my suit. "Captain!" Lena and Mac were instantly beside me, trying to lift me. "Go!" I gasped, coughing up blood. "Save yourselves! I can't make it!" "No way, Emily! We're not leaving you!" Mac's face was etched with desperation. 1 minute! Sirens on the reactor control panel wailed louder, flooding the compartment with red, pulsating light. The avatar, after its final lunge, seemed utterly spent. It sank, dissolving into a puddle of bubbling darkness, from which only a few trembling remnants stuck out. Its numerous eyes dimmed and went out one by one. Mac and Lena, ignoring my protests, hoisted me up and dragged me toward the door. Every step was agonizing, but I gritted my teeth. We couldn't give up now when victory was so close. The corridor to Sector Omega-9 was short, but it felt like an eternity. Behind us, the roar of the dying reactor grew louder. 30 seconds! We burst into a small bay where, pressed against the wall, an escape pod indeed sat, small like a metallic bullet, designed for a maximum of 4. Its hatch was open. Green indicators inside blinked ready. "Hurry!" Mac literally shoved Lena inside and then helped me climb in. He jumped in last. 10, 9, 8. Mac frantically pressed buttons on the capsule's control panel.
The hatch hissed shut, cutting us off from the roar and the red light. 7, 6, 5. The capsule shuddered. 4, 3. With a deafening crash, the pyrotechnic bolts fired, separating the capsule from the prospector's hull. We were slammed into our seats by the G-force. 2, 1. In the capsule's small viewport, we saw it. USCSS Prospector 7, the ghost ship, our tormentor and our prison, flared up like a supernova. A blinding white light briefly flooded everything, and then the ship scattered into millions of incandescent fragments that spread out into the void like a fan. The shockwave violently shook our capsule, but it held. Where the Prospector 7 had just been, only a cloud of superheated gas and small fragments now swirled, rapidly dissipating into the silent blackness of space. The artifact was destroyed. The creature it spawned was, too. We survived. I leaned back in the seat, feeling my strength drain away. The pain in my side was unbearable, but through it pierced a strange, bitter relief. We had won. But the price of that victory was too high. Bull. His face flashed before my eyes, and Captain Carmichael and his crew. Their ghosts still seemed to linger nearby. Lena was crying quietly, silently, burying her face in her knees. Mac sat staring into the viewport at the site of the explosion, his face stone, but tears welled in his eyes. Our small capsule slowly drifted in the void, carrying us away from that cursed place. We were alive, but the scars left by the Prospector 7 would remain with us forever, physical and mental. I closed my eyes. The silence of space, so welcome moments ago, now seemed deafening. Epilogue: Silent Scars of the Void. Scene 1. Several days, which felt like an eternity, passed before our escape pod's automated beacon was pinpointed. To my immense relief, it was the Pathfinder. Javi, our loyal pilot, had never stopped searching, despite losing communication and orders from command to return. He disobeyed orders, risked everything, and found us. The three of us, myself, Mac, and Lena, were brought aboard the Pathfinder. The recovery was long and painful. My broken ribs and internal bleeding required several surgeries. Lena's leg healed slowly, leaving deep scars. Mac got away with bruises and scrapes, but his gaze, it was different. More distant, more troubled. We were debriefed, over and over. Representatives from GeoCorp, fleet security officers. We told the truth about the drifting prospector, the strange artifact, the shape-shifting creature, and our fallen comrades. They listened, nodded, took notes. But in their eyes, we saw disbelief, skepticism. Our stories sounded like the ravings of madmen. The official version, announced later, was predictable. An accident aboard the USCSS Prospector 7 caused by the detonation of an experimental energy core during geological research. The USCSS Pathfinder rescue team heroically attempted to render assistance, but the vessel was unfortunately lost. 3 members of the rescue team survived. 1 perished in the line of duty. Bull. His name was on the list of fallen heroes, but the true cause of his death, like everything else that happened on the Prospector, was buried under the classification of top secret. We suffered from PTSD. Nightmares became our constant companions. I dreamed the dark corridors, shifting shadows, countless eyes watching from nowhere. I woke up in a cold sweat with a scream caught in my throat. During the day, I flinched at every sharp noise, every unexpected shadow. My gaze constantly darted around, searching for a threat where none existed. Or did it?
Scene 2. Several months passed. We were discharged from active duty due to health concerns. We tried to return to normal life, but it was impossible. The past wouldn't let go. One evening, I sat by the viewport of my small apartment on a space station, gazing at the distant, cold stars. They no longer seemed beautiful and inviting. Now, in their light, I only saw the reflection of the artifact's violet glow. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the viewport. A tired face, premature wrinkles, faded eyes. And suddenly, did I imagine it? Or did something alien flicker in the depths of my pupils for a fraction of a second? A strange, multifaceted gleam, unlike the reflection of light. And the shadow behind me, it stretched out for a moment, taking an unnatural, angular shape, before becoming the ordinary shadow of the chair again. I spun around abruptly. No one. The room was empty. It must be just fatigue, echoes of the horror we experienced, a trick of the imagination. But the coldness that ran down my spine was entirely real. The horror didn't vanish without a trace. It wasn't destroyed along with the Prospector 7. It left a piece of itself. In us. In our memories. In our nightmares. Sometimes I think it's still out there in the depths of the Hades belt, waiting, learning, and maybe one day it will reveal itself again. Or maybe it's already here, inside. And that thought is what truly terrifies me, because there is no escape from this trap.